In 1989, HIV and AIDS were still tearing through the gay and queer communities across the United States since their discovery in the 1980s. The epidemic was largely ignored by state and federal authorities for years during the Reagan administration, and due to it being perceived as primarily harming stigmatized groups such as gay men and other queer subcultures who elicited little sympathy from the American public at large. 1987 saw a breakthrough with the drug AZT being administered to at least slow the progression of the AIDS virus. However, one trans person, CM Ralph, would create a video game which would not only highlight AIDS, but raise further funds to combat the epidemic. Welcome, good strangers, to this inaugural episode of Historical Detour. The topic of this episode is inspired by the fact that it's Pride Month, and to highlight an obscure piece of LGBT history. Be sure to like and subscribe, and to promote content that is both fascinating and well researched. Throughout the 1980s, queer artists and activists of all identities and backgrounds protested this erasure and intentional neglect of the epidemic. Among the most famous was the AIDS awareness organization ACT UP, which hosted die-ins to shame the governing authorities into acknowledging and funding research into treatment of AIDS. Another form of awareness began in 1985 with the AIDS Quilt Memorial, whose artistic dedication memorializes all those who have died from AIDS. One media sphere which had yet to properly reference the ongoing epidemic were video games. However, one person, CM Ralph, would change this by channeling their artistic talents to not only make a video game set within the gay haven of Castro Street in San Francisco, but also serve as a love letter and memorial to queer friends who had perished in the epidemic. The game was entitled Caper and Castro, with the tagline, "It's not just a game, it's a game." The game was developed over the course of several months on HyperCard before its approximate release in 1989. Rather than seeking to make a personal profit, Ralph gave the game away freely through bulletin board systems, which utilized telephone lines to share games for the Mac OS, urging the player to, quote, make a donation to the AIDS-related charity of your choice, end quote, proclaiming the game charityware. Organizations which shared it included the Gay and Lesbian Information Bureau. While hard numbers are difficult to come by, it has been claimed that up to 250,000 copies were shared, according to the Museum of Play. While it does have the distinction of being among the earliest games with explicit LGBT themes, it comes with a caveat or asterisk that Caper actually isn't the first game to feature queer characters. In 1985, two French games entitled, pardon my French, Le Crime du Parking and L'amour de Berlin Vassator featured gay characters, while the text adventure Moon Mist the following year can feature the revelation of a bisexual love triangle in the past. All of the aforementioned games are also detective fiction. However, Caper's protagonist is the first explicitly lesbian player character, alongside tackling contemporary issues such as AIDS and vehement queerphobia in the US. The player character is a hard-boiled PI modeled after classic noir heroes such as Philip Marlowe. However, Ralph's heroine differs in that they are a lesbian named Tracker McDyke, a not-so-subtle signifier of their sexuality. The titular caper itself centers on the disappearance of a drag queen named Tessie LaFemme that evolves into an elaborate and deadly conspiracy centering around the nefarious Dolgan Straightman and President LaDuche. Villain names on par with the Mormon cult leader, Ervil LeBaron. What follows is a plot notable not only for its complexity, but also brimming with references to contemporary gay culture and unabashed and unashamed LGBT themes, often tongue-in-cheek and spoofing on the detective mystery genre. While never cited as a direct inspiration, the odd subgenre of gay-centric detective fiction by queer writers was blossoming by the 1980s. The trailblazing 1970 novel Fade Out by Joseph Hansen featured gay insurance investigator Dave Brandsetter. Other novels highlighted issues that directly affected queer communities, including targeted violence and social stigmatization. I'm reminded of the Donald Strachey Mysteries by Richard Lipez when playing this game most clearly. With 3 novels out before the game's creation in 1989, the character solved crimes affecting the gay community in Albany, New York. Strachey being able to move neatly between both the queer community and outside authorities. This kind of dichotomy, a queer member in tune with their community, is reminiscent of McDyke. Independent queer centric publishing houses such as Naiad Press and others promoted queer focused works that were ignored by mainstream printers. These books, and by extension their writers, soon found rapid success in scattered queer communities from the East to West Coast. 1984 was a vital year in queer mystery fiction with the publication of Amateur City, featuring lesbian detective Kate Delafeld, who would star in a series of novels by lesbian writer Catherine V. Forrest. These works and the subjects they tackled would find themselves a worthy, electronic, spiritual continuation with C.M. Ralph's magnum opus. The game was notably difficult when it first came out, with Ralph claiming in a November 1989 article by Cynthia Yockey on the Washington Blade that only, quote, two people have solved the game so far, a 14-year-old boy and this reviewer, both in about 4 hours, end quote. Rather than a dissection of the story beat by beat, the game is freely available to play in its entirety on the wonderful Internet Archive, and I highly recommend playing it as it preserves a unique time capsule of queer media that shows the maturation of the gay and lesbian community in the US. However, if you're a fan of black and white, point and click, mystery, humor, hard-boiled detectives, or queer-centered narratives, this game should appeal to you. There are scattered Let's Plays on YouTube as well that can assist in progressing if needed. For years until 2017, this piece of queer history was considered lost media. Not only that, but to secure a wider release and appeal, a straight-washed version scrubbed of its gay references titled Murder on Main Street was also released concurrently, which was also considered lost, ironically. On the decision to make the hetero version, Ralph stated, quote, it was published by Heiser Software. Back then, you could only order software written by indie programmers from mail order catalogs. They sold the game for several years. Basically, all I did was change the names and places. My reasoning was that I wanted to tap into the mainstream audience. 1988 was a lot different than 2014 when it came to how LGBT people and issues were viewed and treated, end quote. However, miraculously, CM Ralph found floppy disks containing both versions, sharing this with the LGBTQ archive and with assistance from the digital games curator Andrew Borman from the Strong National Museum of Play. They preserved the images of both versions into a playable state, which was added to the Internet Archive. CM Ralph is extremely lucky to have lived long enough to see their decades-old, obscure, yet profound game see renewed interest. Giving talks at public events and to media organizations, including the entertainment magazine Paste in 2014 and National Public Radio in 2021. In the former interview, they reflect on the changed climate for queer people in 2014. I think diversity is always important in all things. As I watch societies evolve and become more inclusive and respectful, I remember not that long ago when they were not. When I was a teenager growing up in upstate New York, you could be arrested and face life in a mental hospital if you were found to be a homosexual. It wasn't until 1973 that the American Psychiatric Association declassified it as a mental illness, and 1990 when it was declassified by the World Health Organization. I am grateful that the LGBT youth of today do not have to live with that kind of fear and stigma, end quote. Their personal website is still up and running, where they discuss contemporary queer issues such as book banning and trans rights, and highlight queer artistic works. Professor Adrian Shaw of Temple University in particular has championed the game as a vital piece of not only video game, but LGBT plus history as a whole, with the game being featured prominently in the book Edge, Sexuality, and Gender at the Margins of Culture. While not necessarily a direct artistic progenitor of future gay and queer-centric narratives and games, Caper and Castro cannot be excluded in trailblazing and setting a high standard for future titles with LGBT characters and themes in the United States. Despite the then taboo subject matter and niche appeal, this gem of LGBT history is now readily available to millions free of charge, although in the spirit of charityware, just be sure to donate to any queer supporting charities of your choice. Link to play down below. If you want more history off the beaten path like this, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Historical Detour. Consider joining my Patreon to be listed in the ending credits of my videos. Farewell.